Hey, thanks for coming out. So you've joined me here at Studio 519 today to talk about some issues pretty passionate to yourself. I asked you to come out here with a single question, which is, how do we better protect our community? And that's a pretty tough question in terms of every community is a little different. So I kind of wanted to talk to you about your community and some of the challenges you've faced within it and the tools that you've had in order to help protect your community. So why don't we just tell me about where you're from? Oh, and sorry, what's your name? I'm getting a little ahead of myself here.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. My name is Leona Morgan, and I've been doing anti-nuclear activism for about 16 years now. And just for the dinner audience, I'm going to say my clans really quickly.
No, please do, yeah.
So, She'e Twadij Eatni Nishle, Tana Bithni Bashish Chinki, Ani Dashiche, Twahaglini Dashanella. So my community is actually here downtown. I live here in the city, and I've been here since I started undergrad at UNM. And I was actually an intern at the quote-unquote Channel 27
when they,
a while
when
back.
They had that, wow.
Yeah, at a different station. So this is really great that you're doing this show. But yeah, so you're asking about the tools, how to better protect our community, and all of these things. I did a lot of work on Navajo, so I guess I can talk about both.
Right.
Like
So
Navajo,
you're an Albuquerque resident, and your family is based out of Navajo Nation, and that's kind of been where your activism has been focused.
Right.
So you kind of consider yourself to have two communities in that regard. You're a New Mexico resident, you're an Albuquerque resident, but also because of your family and your heritage, that's where a lot of your activism and kind of focus takes place.
Right.
Well, tell me, let's say you don't know anything about uranium mining going on in Navajo Nation right now. What's the current state of it? A lot of people kind of don't know what's being mined where in the country. In terms of that pocket of the world, what's going on?
Right. Okay, so mining was prevalent from the 50s. Well, I mean, arguably you can say, starting in the 40s. But the boom really occurred like in the 1950s to the 1970s, and then kind of petered out in the 80s. So much before you were born. And now on Navajo, in New Mexico, there's no mining, but there is mining in the country, different types of mining. So there's the kind where you take out the rock out of the earth. It could be from however you extract it, but then there's also another type of extraction where you use water. And so it's like the water is the vehicle. You use chemicals to extract the uranium this way. It's called in situ leach mining. These are different kinds of extraction. Right now, there's none happening in New Mexico and none on Navajo Nation. Navajo Nation is a pretty tricky area, though.
Right.
I mean, we call it, Dinebekeya, Dinetka. Some people call it Navajo Nation. Some people just call it the Res. But in the eastern side, this is the checkerboard area. So it's really complicated when you get to the jurisdiction. I think there's legal terms like Navajo Indian country, and specifically where my family's from is in the Crown Point region. So my whole family, my dad's side is more from a little bit north of Crown Point, and then my mom is from more west of Crown Point. And actually just over the mesa from Church Rock. So Church Rock, New Mexico is a very well-known place. I would say the epicenter of some of the world's greatest disasters when it comes to uranium mining. So just to wrap up, there was a lot of mining, like I said, and then a lot of mines that were left abandoned because there was no laws to clean them up when they started. So the mining that took place later, let's say after the 70s, after the National Environmental Policy Act, so that was signed in 1969, and that started this process for public participation. So legally, a lot of us know this thing called the NEPA process. I'm going to get to that in a minute.
Awesome.
But yeah, so right now there's no mining, but a lot of mines that were left now are abandoned. So on Navajo, they say there's 523 abandoned uranium mines, or AUM for short. In New Mexico, I've heard different numbers, close to 500, and then across the country, about 15,000 of just uranium mines alone. But I know we're just talking about uranium mining, but there is, I think in total, the number I heard is 600,000 abandoned mines of all kinds in the country.
Okay.
So today we're dealing with a lot of issues coming from climate change. And so people think nuclear is clean energy,
Right,
which it
right.
is not. And so there's this push for uranium mining. And then other types of mining like lithium and cobalt and things for renewable energies, so for batteries and
Okay, and so that's probably a good introduction for kind of where you've come in terms of seeing the mining happening in your community. And is there, there's kind of two separate conversations here. There's the mining that's happened and you're kind of dealing with the blowback that's already been occurred to your region. But then there's also the potential risks of mining that continue to go on. So let's start kind of with what's already happened and what the people who now are living in Crown Point region currently have to deal with, as well as the rest of Navajo Nation and even New Mexico. So you talked a lot about the abandoned uranium mines. A lot of those, from what I understand, are actually on the open surface level, that there's a lot of the soil and mill that was left over, and a lot of that has kind of been open for people to have access to. They're not cut off very well, and a lot of the buildings are still there, and a lot of the buildings end up getting repurposed after having been subject to uranium mining institutions. Is that still something that your community faces in that regard, where there's all of these kind of open abandoned mines and they're not really protected for you guys, nor are they cleaned up very well? Does that kind of describe the issue that you guys have been facing?
Well, again, I live in Albuquerque, and I
Right.
grew up in Fort Defiance, which was not mined. So when you say my community,
Right.
I think it's good for folks to know we're generally talking about Navajo Nation or
Right.
within the Four Sacred Mountains. And I like to point out everything you said. I agree with, and I definitely don't disagree, but I want to point out this is everywhere there's uranium mining. So on Navajo or quote, unquote, my community,
Right.
in any communities where there's uranium mining, there's going to be, especially from the past, those abandoned mines, there's going to be just a lot of
Right.
contamination, and like you said, a lot of places they're not marked, there's no fencing.
Okay.
So it's not just humans who have access to it, but wildlife, and of course birds. Birds can, get into pretty much any location and leave. But the abandoned uranium mines, I think the most important thing for folks to know is there is no cleanup across the country that is mandated by the federal government. So there's some pockets of cleanup. Of course, mining that occurred later where there were laws in place to try to mitigate the contamination. Because it's really hard to clean up not just the surface contamination, but groundwater and
Right.
water in general. So
So
that's
what
something we're
is that
really
process?
concerned about.
What's involved in a company having to go back and saying, we own this mine, we mined it, and now we have to go back and change things? How does a community actually go about getting that cleaned up if they want it gone?
Yeah, these are great questions. So I think something for folks to know is the nuclear industry is largely self-regulated,
Right.
meaning they take their own radiation levels, and if there's an accident, they self-report it to
The NRC isn't directly doing those studies. They're kind of letting the people who own the mines do the water contamination levels. They check the soil levels. They're the ones who get to actually kind of.
I think in general, most industry, like uranium mining, nuclear power plants, all of these things, they are self-regulated. There's no inspector going around, checking boxes with their
saying,
Geiger
hey, you guys
counter.
didn't clean this area up enough. You need to come back and redo your
Right, and then
work
this is at a very contaminated site that has radioactivity levels that are not safe. But if in general, just so folks know, even the Rio Grande, I think, is only monitored once every 10 years. And so there was just a report
Only
that,
once every 10 years.
yes, across the whole state, all of our waterways, there's no capacity to monitor them. We just
Right.
don't have the staff to do that.
Do you know when the last time they did check it
There
was?
was just a report that came out this summer, I
Okay.
think last month, and some of, I think a lot of folks know about E. coli. You're supposed to scoop
Right.
your poop. That's a big source of contamination, is not just dog poop, but a lot of other types of sources of E. coli.
Right.
But the one I'm concerned about is that was noted was gross alpha.
Gross alpha. So what is that?
So there's different types of radiation, and there's different kinds of radioactivity, it travels different ways. And I'm not a scientist.
Sure,
so when you
yeah.
ask me about cleaning up mines and all of this stuff,
there's a
I'm
very
an
large process in
activist.
that,
So
yeah.
this is citizen science that I'm talking about.
I
I
like that
help
term,
to.
citizen science.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is something that folks, I think it's imperative for people to do if they want to know what's really going on. So myself and some team members, we started what's called the Radiation Monitoring Project. So we wrote some grants and we got a bunch of Geiger counters and we basically taught ourselves how to monitor radiation. So we asked experts to come in and do the training, and we held 10 across the country in different communities dealing with all kinds of nuclear issues. So uranium mining, milling, nuclear power plants, transport. Anyway, so this is something that I got started in the process of doing this work because I myself didn't know what is gross alpha, what are alternative concentration levels, what is gamma radiation, all these things. They're very confusing and very complicated sometimes, and it deters people from really learning about nuclear or trying to understand it. So I'm going to tell you,
It's easy to leave it to someone else.
I'm going to tell you, I don't fully understand it.
Sure.
I know that I know about radiation, but I don't know how did my family get cancer? Why did it occur to, whoever in my family died of X, Y, and Z, this and that? I don't think we fully understand the human health impacts and the genetic impacts, but in general, I can give you the citizen tools that I have used over the course of my activism to kind of...
And that's kind of good into the question of, how do you better protect your community? What are some of the tools that you actually had in order to say, all right, so we're going to identify this problem. I'd like the organizations and the government that are all involved in this to step up a bit more and help us kind of take an evaluation at least of the problem. What did you have that you were able to use in order to do that? And what might somewhere else, anywhere in the country, like you said, have those same tools at their disposal?
So in the beginning, I had about zero knowledge of uranium, $0.
Where most people start with this problem.
I had a lot of I had a lot of energy because I had just put together uranium mining and then the death of my grandmother. One of my grandmothers died from lung cancer. So when I really started to understand how somebody who never mined, an innocent bystander, became a victim of the nuclear industry. So for me, it's very simple that the nuclear industry kills. The nuclear industry commits genocide. It's murder, basically. So all of these abandoned uranium mines that are blowing around contamination that everybody's
it directly
breathing
affected
in.
your family, yeah.
It affects my family, and it affects a lot of people in New Mexico, a lot of people, and that's just uranium mining. We're not even talking about like the Nevada tests, the downwind impacts from the Trinity test and other nuclear facilities. But for me personally, I think it was that the interest and the passion that I had was really it. And then from there, some of the other tools were really resources that came together because at that time, it was a pinnacle moment in the nuclear industry that they themselves termed the nuclear renaissance.
Right.
So uranium is not marketed. It's super highly marketed by the nuclear industry, but it doesn't work the same as, let's say, grains. So like a supply and demand type of economy. So the industry, they will have to amp up their own market. So there's really no demand for uranium.
So,
like we don't eat it. We can live without
So
it.
this kind of comes to my next part. So I talked about, you deal with this problem of what you've already done and now you're dealing with the fallout. And you've gone through having to get grants and trying to get government attention on these issues. But that's actually not the end of uranium, of course. Now we're talking in a much bigger national, worldwide conversation about now let's start applying uranium to more places. In my research for preparing to talk to you, I discovered that most uranium that the world uses today comes from Kazakhstan and Canada, and they do the majority of what's coming out. And in recent times, I understand that there has been a little bit more of a push because of the, of course, excess need for nuclear energy. But there's actually a lot of old Soviet reactors in Europe that now people are worried, or they can't get their uranium from Russia anymore. So we kind of had to have stepped up and saying, hey, let's get you guys the uranium you need, as well as our weapons portion of trying to make nuclear weapons. We don't like that being in the tools of other countries either. We like to keep that in-house. So in the United States, where are some of the other places you know that uranium mining happens besides Navajo Nation?
Well, yeah, so the different places like South Dakota, South Texas, in Arizona, and right now I really want to talk about Grand Canyon, but
Okay.
kind of to go back to your first question, some of the ways and the tools that came together for me were just people. So different experts, different community folks who live in these places, who are experts in their own right, especially like people that use the land and understand how the water flows, how the watershed works. So all of these people in 2006, 2007, during this nuclear renaissance, we all came together, and there was different coalitions formed, different groups, lots of organizing. I like to stress the importance of strategic planning. So it's not like, oh, we're all going to go protest and march on Window Rock. There's a long process of things that need to occur. And so it took me about a year to understand uranium, and what it is, what it does, why it's not good, and then how to communicate that to my people, who most of the people who are in the decision-making roles in the chapter houses are elders who may or may not speak English. So I had a difficult time to have to do a lot of education. So really it was people, education, and just working together. So most of the work I've done, it wasn't like big money and big, huge things. It was a lot of very locally based strategic actions. So like this year, at the beginning of the year, we just passed a law to stop Holtec, this huge international company that wants to build a nuclear waste site here in New Mexico. And we got a state law to stop it. And just recently, a similar type of nuclear waste dump was proposed in Texas, and that was shut down through different lawsuits. So this, for me, that took 7 years of just focusing on one issue.
And what's the danger of those store sites that they were wanting to open up and into those communities? And what was kind of their local reasonings for saying, hey, we don't really want this kind of being stored here? What was kind of the risk that they were looking at?
Well, it's really funny. So I like to connect both the uranium and the Holtec issue, or what we call consolidated interim storage, or CIS. So the nuclear fuel chain, you got uranium mining, exploration, all of the fuel fabrication and things like that for both weapons and energy, and then the waste from all of it, and then the use of weapons, and then the energy and all of that. So everything has waste, and everything has a different type of danger depending on the types of radiation that are released and where it goes in the environment, and then if it gets absorbed into your body and how that happens. It could be in the food, it could be in the plants, and then the animals eat the plants, and then we eat the animals. So the impacts are different depending where you live, what you eat. You know, all of these things are relative to the issue that you're dealing with. So you mentioned mills. We had a lot of abandoned uranium mines. I mentioned 15,000 across the country. I don't know the number of mills across the country, but mills are the place where there's not as many of them, but that's the place where they processed the uranium.
Right.
And there's only one in the country today. There's only one that's left operating.
That's active, yeah.
One active. It's called White Mesa Mill. And to me, these are a lot more, these created a lot more waste than the mines. I mean, the mines, that wasn't really processed. They exposed the uranium to oxygen, which changed it, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But with the mills, they added chemicals, they used a lot of water, and water is used to suppress radiation. So you need water at every nuclear site. So if you imagine across the desert how much water has been used for these sites. But you're asking about the tools and the dangers. I think, so this all goes hand in hand. When people are educated on the dangers, they can employ tools to protect themselves. And so for radiation, there's three ways to protect yourself from radiation: time, distance, and shielding. So you want to spend as little time as possible at these sites. You want shielding. Some radiation you can stop with a piece of paper. Some you need, a few layers of thick lead, But the time, distance, shielding. So distance is you get away from the source of radiation. But for indigenous people who live at these places and our whole life, our philosophies are within these lands, we're not going to move. So
right,
it's not.
That's your land. It's hard to put a few of those pieces together if you need distance and shielding, if that's where you are. And that's kind of bringing me kind of.
But let me
sorry,
just finish your question. Yeah. So there's other tools to use. So besides education and just the basic like common sense kind of thing, there's you can do organizing, you can do political actions, like I said, passing laws, and so that's what the Navajo Nation did. They made a law to stop uranium mining within the Navajo Nation, right? In 2005, and then a law to stop transport of uranium. But the thing is, earlier I mentioned the checkerboard area. So we have a lot of issues with jurisdiction. So there's a lot of loopholes, right, especially out in northwestern New Mexico. And so right now, to go back to your first question, there is a company that has started illegal uranium drilling. This is an ISL activity going on at a place called Section 17. The place is generally known as Church Rock, but right, it's north of Church Rock. If anyone's familiar with the area, this is just a few miles down from the Church Rock spill of 1979. So if you're in Church Rock and you drive up New Mexico 566, you would go up approximately 8 miles. And then to your left, you'll see this big yellow building, and that is Section 17. And that's where Laramide Resources started to do illegal drilling late last year. And what they're planning to do is extract uranium using ISL methods. And then originally they were going to process this in Crown Point, New Mexico. Right. So this was a big concern for a lot of my relatives who still live there. And of course, it's not just my relatives. There's 2 colleges, there's a hospital, there's a grocery store, several churches. This is a pretty large community on the Navajo Nation. And I would venture to guess many people don't know what is that right, big building down by the churches.
And I'll actually kind of go from this from a different angle. As someone who grew up in Albuquerque, I didn't know a lot about, like you said, in that checkerboard area, what is the legality for those areas. When it comes to states and counties, it's a bit straightforward. But I was kind of amazed because I also learned that there was the law passed in 2005 to prevent that. But I also saw in 2012, they were attempting to do ISL mining in the Crown Point region and in the Shiprock area. And in both of those instances, one that's actually never been done with the aquifer nearby. That was actually the first instance of them attempting to do that. But in 2012, I saw that Navajo Nation actually did petition the Human Rights Commission for violating that statute because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission wasn't stepping up to say, hey, this isn't okay. They actually were encouraging this kind of action. And it came from permits from New Mexico, not Navajo Nation. So how does that work? How is this company mining in Navajo Nation? How are they doing the process? They're trying to do the processing there. And all the while, it's actually New Mexican politicians who are the ones kind of approving everything and giving the go-ahead. How does that actually work legally? Because if someone tried to do that in my backyard, I would have a very long list of statutes saying, hey, you can't do that. This is my property. How does that work for you guys?
Well, so this is a longer, complicated story.
Sure.
I will say it's not legal. I think, so this is some homework I'm still working on. How did this Canadian company start drilling on Navajo? I mean, first of all, they took the licenses and all the permits that were already given to the previous company, which was Hydro Resources Incorporated, way back in the 80s. And so HRI was trying to do this ISL mining, gotcha. and then later URI took over. So I was a big part of that fight during my time with the Eastern Navajo Diné against uranium mining. So we had to actually fight our own Navajo Nation council delegates who were working with the uranium company to do mining. So our own Navajo people were violating Navajo law by trying to assist this uranium company to do mining in the checkerboard area. So even though we have a law against it, this is on a private land, on a piece of private land, and part of it is also, so Laramide Resources bought URI, formerly Hydro Resources Incorporated. Later, it was Uranium Resources Incorporated that had acquired all the permits to do the ISL mining, which was from the NRC, as well as an aquifer exemption from the US EPA. So all of those permits were given in the 80s. And so right now, it's possible that there is some new, maybe a New Mexican state permit that the company needs. But as far as we're concerned, this company, they bought the former site of a uranium company and all the permits to mine. However, back in 2012, the Navajo Nation had, like you said, there was this law that says no transport over Navajo. So the uranium company, they have private land that's several feet from the New Mexico highway. So in order to take their uranium off of their private land, they have to go over Navajo jurisdiction.
Gotcha.
And so effectively, that stopped the mining. But it was a Navajo council delegate who made a law to give the right-of-way to the uranium company.
So
and his name is Leonard Sosi. And they were already going, transporting. They were not transporting because the mining never started back then. But they were caught trespassing by the Navajo Nation. And the Navajo Nation fined them $50. But in addition to that,
that was their slap on the wrist.
Well, that was the slap on the wrist. But the big thing is they made the company sign and agree to the full jurisdiction of the Navajo Nation. And that is significant because in this temporary access agreement, Laramide said, well, Laramide wasn't in the picture back then. In this agreement, URI agreed to clean up any pre-existing contamination on Section 17 before it can start drilling on Section 8. So what they did last year was Section 17 is just south of Section 8. So they were drilling as close to Section 8 as they possibly could.
Just kind of inching into that area.
So technically they didn't go into Section 8, but they still are supposed to clean up Section 17 before any new mining can occur at Section 8. So nobody is out there, as far as I'm concerned, watching to make sure Section 8 is not being drilled or anything. Okay. So this is something that is very important that in the Hall No fight, which we emphasize, is to get people watching all the time. So if you see something, say something. And if you're on the res, post it on Facebook. Everyone still uses Facebook. And so when we were working on this fight, this is a transport fight because there's a mine at the Grand Canyon that is it's fully permitted to mine, but it hasn't started.
But it has to.
So when Biden signed the, I keep saying that, and back in 2012, I'm skipping to a different topic. Obama signed a moratorium to protect 1 million acres around the Grand Canyon from uranium mining. Biden just made that permanent. But the thing is, people are not talking about the mines that are already permitted.
And
those can go forward. So yeah, there's several different mines that can possibly start going forward. And the closest one to move is called Pinon Plain Canyon Mine. And so when Biden signed this national monument, they threatened to start mining as soon as possible. And so we're watching them and we're monitoring them. But just like at Church Rock, these are on both sides of the Navajo Nation. If the Grand Canyon mine starts, that will go through the Navajo Nation on federal and state highways, which we don't have jurisdiction on. And that will go to the White Mesa Mill, which is on Ute lands.
Essentially circumventing the whole point you're trying to avoid anyway.
Yes, so that's why we say Hall
Hall
No.
No.
And so we need more people watching, and those are the most important tools that people can employ themselves, their eyes.
And I wish we had more time to talk about this issue for sure. And one thing, I guess that's to wrap up that question of, how do we better protect our communities? Whether it's the folks in Grand Canyon that are currently still fighting that battle, the folks in Crown Point and Church Rock that are dealing with the consequences of what's already happened, or anyone else in our country that might be dealing with these kind of mines or other type of mining that might be affecting their community, their drinking sources. What are how do you think they can better protect those communities?
Well, on a personal level, try to know where is the contamination and try not to drink contaminated water. I mean, I'm trying not to laugh because that sounds so super common sense, but some people don't have access to clean water. So you need to protect yourself is the very, foremost important thing I think folks need to understand. But getting involved civically, so going to your city council meeting, going to the chapter house, and telling people in positions of power we don't want it, and demand that they don't allow it. And then you can also help to make laws, you can do all these things. You can make art, you can, talk about it at school, you can put it out, put pictures, posters in your window if you're a business. But I think the most important thing is once you're educated on these things and you start to recognize how laws are made and decisions are made, it's important to use that public participation process and pay attention if there's a public comment period. Like for this illegal drilling, they're going to have probably something's going to happen. And then there's all these bad cleanup plans in Church Rock. We didn't get a chance to talk about them. Those are going to have some public comment periods. Holtec, that's over.
Look for those opportunities to discuss and make sure you're showing up.
And
so
sometimes there's not. Sometimes they don't just do it for you out of the kindness of their heart. You have to demand hearings. And then at the end of the day, some people, like in Europe, they chain themselves to the railroads. They literally put their bodies on the line
for that kind of
that's
behavior
like a last resort.
So educate yourself, protect yourself, and then just participate as much as possible until you see the change you're looking for.
Yeah, and then do fun stuff. Do whatever you enjoy. So like with the radiation monitoring project, it's really scary to learn about radiation, but it's kind of fun to play with Geiger counters. It can be fun, you can do fun stuff with fighting nuclear.
So Hall that's your group that you're looking right now that's working in Grand Canyon, trying to stop that transport. So thank you for coming in to talk with me. I wish we had more time to talk about this. Maybe we can talk about it further in the future. But thanks for talking today. I really appreciate it, and I learned a lot. So
good. Thank you. Me too. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for coming in. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. We're good here, guys.